Hello everybody. So we are in the season of Lent as we are following Jesus to the cross and thinking a little more about his suffering and death so that we can get ready to think a little more about his Easter victory and resurrection, which of course guarantees that we will also have resurrection one day. We have midweek Lenten services at our church here in Katy at both 10 o'clock in the morning as well as 7 o'clock in the evening. And so I thought that for our Wednesday devotion here that I'm giving you on both YouTube and podcast, we would do a review of the sermon from Sunday. Because if you've been to one of our services, you know that we regularly print 3 questions in the service folder underneath the sermon verses in that part of the service. And these are the 3 questions. What sin do these scripture verses point out to me? Where in these scripture verses do I see God's plan of forgiveness through Jesus? And then thirdly, what is one attitude adjustment these scripture verses help me to have? So we're going to walk through those today with the sermon verses that we covered just last Sunday, which if you wanted to hear the fuller sermon, you can find that on our podcast as well. The sermon from Sunday was about David and Goliath, and a lot of people think that David and Goliath is all about an underdog taking down a favorite, because that metaphor, David slayed Goliath, is used a lot in the sports world. But really, David and Goliath is all about honoring the Lord's name. And what sin do these scripture verses that we covered point out? Well, obviously, Goliath was very sinful as he's standing there 9 feet tall. His bronze armor coat weighed 125 pounds. And he's bragging about himself and he's defying God and daring anyone from the nation of Israel, including the God in whom they supposedly trusted, to stop him. But Saul and the Israelites also were dishonoring the name of the Lord. Never once, as Goliath is shouting all this all the time, do we hear them praying to the Lord for help. Never once do we hear them replaying how God has brought either them through a tough time in victory in their life, or how God has brought someone who has gone before them and trusted in his saving grace and brought them through a tough time into his heavenly kingdom. Instead, what we find Saul and the Israelites doing is being dominated by their own name, just in a subtly defiant way, instead of an openly defiant way like Goliath, as they're quivering in their tents. And I see those sins a lot in us too. Pride, bragging, being so arrogant like Goliath, as well as subtly proud, being all about yourself and anxious and terrified and unable to change and really unwilling to listen to. We can get that way as well. The second question, where in these scripture verses do I see God's plan of forgiveness through Jesus? Well, is it fun to deal with arrogant people? Is it fun to deal with afraid people who just won't listen to anything either? It's not. And yet Jesus does and Jesus has. He decided to come for a world full of sinners, full of people who are all about their own names. And he decided to put his name in place of theirs, to trade. That Jesus would become the sinner and pay for it all at the cross, and that our names would become holy and perfect because of what Jesus gifts to us through his life, death, and resurrection. And that brings us to the third question. What attitude adjustment do I want to have as I think about these scripture verses? And you think about how David was here in this day. David was all about the Lord's name. Here's a key verse from the sermon verses for today. David said to Goliath the Philistine, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This very day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. This very day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals." And here's the key point. "And the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel." David's life was all about the Lord's name, not his own. You do hear him praying to the Lord for help in these verses. You do hear him replaying the details, not of Goliath and how big he is and how strong he is and how scary he was, but of the victory the Lord had given him against the bear when he saved a sheep of his flock from the bear, and the victory the Lord had given him against the lion when he saved a sheep of his flock from the paw of the lion. David's replaying the details of all that the Lord had done for him and was confident he would do more for him in this battle with Goliath, because all David really cared about wasn't David's victory or loss. It was about the Lord's name being honored. And there we want to have our attitude adjusted. No more bragging about giving yourself credit for what you've done. You wouldn't have one single thing if God hadn't allowed you the abilities or the ability to breathe and think so that you could get that done. No more being self-centered, though, either in a loss type of way where we think that we have to fix everything and fix it immediately, and it's so overwhelming and scary because we just can't. Let's honor the name of the Lord today and make that your one goal, to put one foot in front of the next, to let everyone around you know in a quietly confident and repentant way, my greatest name is Jesus. That he has destroyed the devil's work on my behalf, and that he will be with me every minute of every day, no matter what Goliath I'm staring at in my life, as I let him win the battle for me in his time and in his way, giving me relief as needed and success as needed until the day comes when he takes me to heavenly glory. God bless you as you honor the Lord's name today, and do what you can so that everybody around you knows that.